The church bells rang out across the quiet Sunday morning, their tones both solemn and celebratory. Families filled the pews with murmured chatter, children squirming in starched clothes, godparents whispering lines they had rehearsed. I sat near the front, hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to focus on the joy of the day, my first grandchild's baptism. It should have been pure celebration. My son stood proudly with his wife, cradling the infant in the crook of her arm, their faces lit with anticipation. My husband, Mark, was a few steps away, chatting easily with the priest, as though he belonged at the center of everything. His voice carried in that deep, reassuring tone that had once charmed me decades ago. Even after all these years, he could fill a room with calm authority. But today, there was something about his presence that unsettled me. He looked too invested, too attached. Not simply a grandfather, but something else I couldn't name yet. The priest called us to attention. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, scattering shards of color across the marble floor. The baby fussed softly, wrapped in a delicate white blanket that my mother once sewed. When the priest opened his book and began the words of sacrament, I felt tears prick my eyes. Tears of pride, of love, of gratitude for this new life in our family. Then, everything shifted. "Is the father present for acknowledgement?" the priest asked as part of the formal documentation. He looked at my son, but before he could answer, Mark stepped forward with startling confidence. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I already signed the medical acknowledgement." The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. Ripples of confusion moved through me. My son gave a puzzled glance, but the moment passed too quickly for anyone else to notice. I forced a polite smile, my heart suddenly hammering. What acknowledgement? The question tore through me like a knife. Baptism records didn't require anything beyond the parents' signatures. Why would Mark sign something? My throat dried. I turned to him slowly, trying to catch his eyes, but he was already focused on the priest again, as if nothing unusual had been said. I felt dizzy. The candles flickered, shadows stretching across the altar. The congregation remained oblivious, following the ritual with bowed heads and clasped hands. But inside me, panic bloomed. My husband's voice replayed in my ears. I already signed the medical acknowledgement. Medical. A word that didn't belong here, not in this sacred moment. My mind raced back to whispered conversations I had overheard months ago. Mark telling my daughter-in-law, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." At the time, I had assumed he meant financial help. But now, standing in this holy place, I wondered if there was something far more sinister buried in those words. As the priest poured water gently over the baby's forehead, my hands trembled. I clasped them tighter, trying to appear serene. To anyone else, I was just a grandmother overcome with emotion. But beneath the mask, my thoughts spiraled. Could it be? No, impossible. Mark was my husband, my partner of 30 years. He was a grandfather now. And yet, as I looked at the child's tiny features, a strange familiarity tugged at me. The curve of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. A reflection I had overlooked until this moment, suddenly illuminated under the harsh light of suspicion. I leaned closer to my son. My voice was barely a whisper. "What acknowledgement?" He blinked at me, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I forced a smile, swallowing my panic. "Nothing. I just thought, never mind." He turned back toward the ceremony, unaware that the ground beneath me had already cracked open. The priest concluded the blessing, and applause filled the church. Families surged forward, taking photos, showering the young parents with congratulations. I clapped along, a hollow sound escaping my hands. Inside, my chest ached with a fear too large to contain. I stole a glance at Mark. He was beaming, clapping harder than anyone else, his hand resting just a moment too long on my daughter-in-law's shoulder. She smiled, but there was tension at the corner of her mouth, a quick dart of her eyes that seemed almost guilty. My stomach churned. Was I imagining this? Was I letting paranoia poison what should be a perfect day? Yet deep down, I knew. A seed had been planted, and once planted, it cannot be unthought. The applause faded, and the organ began to play. People filed out of the pews, their voices lifted in cheerful chatter. I rose mechanically, following the flow, my face stretched into a practiced expression of joy. But my mind screamed with questions. Had I just discovered that my grandson's father was not my son at all, but my own husband? I smiled at the cameras, kissed relatives on the cheek, accepted hugs from well-meaning friends. But every laugh was hollow, every step heavy with dread. The church, once a place of comfort, now felt like a stage where I played the role of happy matriarch, while the truth threatened to tear me apart. As I held my grandson in my arms, his small fingers curling around mine, I forced back tears. He was innocent. None of this was his fault. And yet, his very existence might be proof of the greatest betrayal of my life. I pressed a kiss to his forehead and whispered silently, "I will find out the truth. And when I do, nothing will ever be the same again." The church reception hall smelled faintly of coffee and sugared pastries. Round tables were set with white cloths, and balloons bobbed against the ceiling as family and friends milled about. Voices overlapped in laughter, plates clinked, and children darted between adults, still buzzing from being freed from stiff pews. To everyone else, it was a continuation of the celebration. To me, it felt like stepping into a masquerade where I was the only one who knew the masks were slipping. I held a plate of food I had no appetite for and watched my family gather. My son, radiant with pride, bounced the baby in his arms while guests showered him with congratulations. His wife, my daughter-in-law, stood nearby, her smile polite but faint. She looked tired, but there was more than fatigue in her eyes. I had seen that expression before on women carrying secrets too heavy to admit. Mark drifted through the crowd like a host rather than a guest, shaking hands, laughing too easily, even pouring wine for the priest. He looked comfortable, almost triumphant. I wanted to believe I had misheard his words at the baptism. Maybe he meant nothing by medical acknowledgement. Maybe it was just an error in paperwork. But every time I caught him glancing at my grandson, pride shone in his eyes with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. I sat down at the edge of the room, trying to still my hands that trembled around a cup of untouched coffee. My daughter came to check on me. "Mom, you're pale," she said softly, kneeling beside me. "Are you all right? You barely ate." I forced a small laugh. "Just tired. It's been a long morning." She studied me with concern, then nodded, distracted by someone calling her name. When she turned away, I released the breath I'd been holding. From across the room, Mark caught my eye. He smiled, raised his glass in a small toast, as if we shared a private joke. I looked away quickly, my heart lurching. There was nothing funny about what I suspected. As the afternoon carried on, I helped gather the baptism gifts, arranging them into neat stacks on a table. Most were wrapped in pastel paper with ribbons, tiny clothes, silver keepsakes, envelopes of money. My hands paused on a plain white envelope, heavy and unadorned, wedged between brightly wrapped boxes. I almost set it aside, assuming it was just another card. But something about the way my daughter-in-law hurried over and whispered, "Oh, I'll take that one," made my chest tighten. She slipped it into her purse before I could ask. But she was too late. In that brief moment, the flap had bent open, and I had glimpsed official letterhead. A clinic name. I stood frozen as she walked away, laughing too loudly at something my son said. My stomach clenched. Why would a fertility clinic be involved in this? I excused myself and headed toward the coat room for air. My hands shook as I replayed every conversation of the past year. The nights Mark had come home late, muttering about work dinners. The way he insisted on helping with their medical bills. How quickly he dismissed any questions I had about the process when my daughter-in-law got pregnant. "Science is complicated," he'd said once with a dismissive wave. "What matters is that they'll have a baby." Now the words struck me differently. What if Mark hadn't just paid for the process? What if he had inserted himself into it? I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat pound like a warning drum. Returning to the hall, I tried to act normal. My grandson had fallen asleep in his carrier, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. I bent down to adjust his blanket, my eyes filling with tears I dared not let fall. Innocence radiated from him, untainted by the shadows swirling around us. Mark walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, almost claiming. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, smiling. I forced myself to look up at him. "Yes," I whispered. "Beautiful." But inside, dread coiled tighter. That envelope, the clinic, his slip of words at the baptism, all pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete but knew I had to. The priest called for a toast. Glasses clinked, and laughter rang out. I raised mine like everyone else, my face fixed into the mask of a happy grandmother. Yet behind my smile, I felt the foundations of my marriage and family beginning to crack. As the crowd sang a hymn to close the celebration, I stood apart, the notes echoing hollow in my ears. In that moment, one truth settled into me like ice. I could no longer dismiss what I had seen. Something was terribly wrong, and I was the only one who noticed. And once you notice, you cannot go back. The house was quiet that evening, but inside me, the noise hadn't stopped. Every laugh and clink of glasses from the baptism reception still rattled around in my skull, twisted now into mockery. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even lie still. My thoughts kept circling back to that plain white envelope, to the word clinic I had glimpsed before my daughter-in-law tucked it away. Mark was snoring softly beside me in our bedroom, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He looked so at peace that for a moment I hated him. How could he rest so easily while I lay there unraveling? I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded down the hallway with the practiced quiet of a woman who has kept secrets before, though never like this. In the kitchen, I sat at the table with a cup of tea I had no desire to drink. I opened my phone and searched the name of the clinic. My pulse thudded when the logo matched what I had glimpsed. It was a fertility center, one known for IVF and donor services. My son and his wife had gone there when they struggled to conceive. We had all been so relieved when it worked, almost too relieved now that I thought about it. I pushed my chair back, restless, and opened the drawer where I keep old receipts and church bulletins. Months ago, my daughter-in-law had slipped me an envelope to drop in there. Something she said was just extra paperwork for insurance. My hands shook as I shuffled through, and there it was, another folded sheet with the same logo. I spread it flat on the table. It wasn't just a bill. It was a donor acknowledgement. My eyes raced over the words, stopping cold at the printed code. Donor ID 0423M-RK. My breath caught. Those weren't random letters. The MRK wasn't coincidence. It mirrored my husband's initials exactly, Mark Richard Keller. And the numbers, Real 423. His birthday. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. No one would be that careless, would they? Not unless they never expected me to look. I pressed the paper to my chest, fighting tears. Memories flooded back, Mark insisting on covering the clinic costs, brushing off any questions I had. "It's complicated, honey. Just trust me," he'd said with that confident smile. How many times had I mistaken his secrecy for generosity? For a moment, I almost crumpled the document and buried it back where I found it. Pretend I hadn't seen. Pretend life was still intact. But the words burned in my hands. There was no unseeing them. The sound of floorboards creaked behind me. I froze. "Can't sleep?" Mark's voice floated into the kitchen. He wore that easy half smile, rubbing his eyes like he had just woken from the best sleep of his life. I shoved the paper under a magazine, heart pounding. "Tea," I said quickly. "I couldn't settle." He poured himself water and leaned on the counter, studying me. "You've seemed on edge today?" "Big day," I forced a laugh. Emotions always run high at baptisms. He chuckled, as though the conversation were casual. "True. Family days remind us of what really matters." He paused, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Bloodline, legacy, you know." The words made my skin crawl. I managed a stiff nod, pretending to sip my tea. He didn't notice my trembling hands. Or maybe he did, and simply didn't care. When he went back to bed, I pulled the paper out again and stared at it under the yellow kitchen light. My mind screamed at me. It's him. It has to be him. I folded the document carefully, sliding it into an old sewing kit box in the laundry room. No one touched that box but me. It would be safe there, at least for now. Back in bed, I lay awake listening to his breathing. Every sound of his sleep, the sighs, the low rumble, felt like betrayal itself. How many lies had he whispered to her in the dark? How had he convinced her to let this happen? I turned my face toward the ceiling, hot tears streaming silently into my hair. My whole marriage replayed before me. Anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, each memory now stained by the possibility that the man lying inches away was capable of creating a child behind my back, and not just with anyone, but with my own son's wife. I whispered into the dark, more to myself than anyone else. "What have you done, Mark? What have you done to us?" The baby's face swam before me, innocent and unknowing. That tiny jawline that looked just a little too familiar. I closed my eyes, clutching the blanket tight around me. Tonight, I had found my first real clue. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would find the rest. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as though the world were ordinary. But inside me, nothing was ordinary anymore. I moved through breakfast like a ghost, setting coffee in front of Mark, buttering toast, listening to him hum, as if our life hadn't been ripped open inside my chest the night before. He kissed my cheek lightly, the way he always did, but I stiffened. Every touch felt like a performance, every smile rehearsed. He didn't notice, or maybe he pretended not to. I watched him read the paper, the corners of his mouth turning slightly as he skimmed the headlines. His calm composure almost convinced me I had imagined everything, that the donor code wasn't real, that I hadn't heard him claim medical acknowledgement at the baptism. Almost. But the truth gnawed at me, and the only way forward was to observe, to collect pieces without tipping my hand. That day, I lingered around him more than usual. When he made phone calls in his office, I pretended to dust nearby. He lowered his voice at certain names, shifting in his chair when he realized I was within earshot. I caught fragments. "Confidential," insurance coverage. No one else can know. At dinner with our son and his wife later in the week, I noticed details I had once brushed aside. The way my daughter-in-law froze whenever Mark's hand brushed her arm too casually. How his eyes lingered on the baby, not with the distant pride of a grandfather, but with something sharper, proprietary. I tried to test him without being obvious. When conversation turned to the baby's health, I said lightly, "It's funny how genes work. Sometimes a baby looks like an uncle, sometimes even like a grandfather." Mark's fork paused mid-air. A flicker crossed his face before he forced a chuckle. "Yes, genetics can be tricky," he said, then quickly changed the subject. My heart pounded. That pause, that tiny hesitation, was louder than any confession. Later that night, as I cleared dishes in the kitchen, I overheard hushed voices from the porch. My daughter-in-law's tone was frantic, urgent. "You promised it would never come out," she whispered. I froze, gripping a glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Mark's voice followed, low but firm. "Calm down. As long as we stay careful, she'll never know." The glass slipped from my hand and cracked against the sink, startling me back into motion. I hurried to stack plates noisily, pretending I hadn't heard. My pulse raced in my ears. They were talking about me. When they returned inside, Mark glanced at me, his expression unreadable. My daughter-in-law's eyes were red, her smile brittle. She excused herself quickly, saying the baby needed changing. I forced a laugh, feigning clumsiness as I swept the broken shards into the trash. "Old hands, you know. Can't grip like I used to." Mark studied me for a moment longer, then kissed my temple and went to the living room. His affection now felt like contamination, a cover for rot. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The house felt like a cage of secrets pressing in on me. I knew now, with chilling certainty, that what I had feared was true. He wasn't just playing patriarch. He had entwined himself into our son's marriage, into their very bloodline, as if erasing boundaries would make him immortal. I turned on my side, whispering to myself in the dark, "I'm not crazy. I heard them. I saw the papers. He's hiding in plain sight." Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to wake the house and tear the truth out into the open. But I couldn't, at least not yet. If I confronted him without proof, he would twist it back on me. He always had that ability, to sound rational while making me seem emotional, unstable. No. I needed evidence strong enough to shatter his defenses. Still, suspicion weighed heavy. I began to watch every move like a detective trapped inside her own marriage. His phone calls, his excuses, the way he reached for the baby. Each detail was another nail hammered into the coffin of trust I once had. And yet, in front of the family, I had to keep smiling. My son looked happier than I'd seen him in years, carrying his child proudly, unaware of the storm waiting just behind him. Protecting him meant patience, even if it tore me apart to wait. One evening, as I folded laundry, I caught myself whispering aloud, "I will find the truth, and when I do, he won't see me coming." I pressed my hands into the warm pile of clothes, fighting tears. Each stitch of fabric, each sock and shirt, felt like a reminder of the life I had kept together for decades. A life Mark had decided wasn't enough. By then, suspicion was no longer suspicion. It was certainty, and certainty demanded action. I just didn't yet know how explosive the next discovery would be. I couldn't live in suspicion forever. The weight of it pressed so hard on my chest that even breathing felt like betrayal to myself. I needed to hear it spoken, out loud, no more shadows or coded words, and the only person who could confirm what I already feared was my daughter-in-law. It happened on a gray Tuesday afternoon. My son had taken the baby for a doctor's checkup, leaving her alone at home. I told myself I was dropping by with soup, a grandmother's errand, but my hands trembled the whole drive. The thermos on the passenger seat rattled each time I turned. When she opened the door, she looked startled. Her smile was polite but tight, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "Oh, hi, I wasn't expecting you." "I thought you could use some lunch," I said, stepping past her before she could protest. "You've been run ragged lately." She thanked me faintly and set the thermos on the counter. Her movements were jerky, as though she were bracing for something. Maybe she already knew this conversation was inevitable. We sat at the table, and for a few long seconds, I simply studied her. She was young, far younger than my son in temperament. Her eyes darted to the window, the floor, anywhere but me. I realized then that she wasn't just tired, she was scared. "Can I ask you something?" I finally said, keeping my voice low, gentle. "And I need the truth, not the answer you think I want." Her lips parted, but no words came. I leaned forward. "At the baptism, Mark said he signed a medical acknowledgement, and later, I saw an envelope from the clinic. It had his initials, his birth date. Please don't tell me I imagined it." Her hands flew to her face. A muffled sob broke from her chest, and for a moment, guilt stabbed through me. She was barely out of her 20s. She shouldn't be carrying a burden this heavy. "Please," I whispered, "just tell me." She dropped her hands and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "He said it was for the family, that it was the only way to make it work. He said my husband would never have to know." The words sliced through me sharper than any blade. My body went cold. I forced myself to ask, though my voice trembled. "You mean the baby is his?" She nodded, tears spilling. "I didn't want it, but he kept saying it was fate, that it would keep the bloodline strong. He promised it would stay secret. He said if I refused, the treatments might stop. And we wanted a baby so badly. I felt trapped." I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the urge to scream. Betrayal had a taste, metallic, bitter. My husband, the man who swore to protect me, had cornered her, exploited her desperation, and stolen something sacred. "How could you let him?" I hissed before I could stop myself. She flinched. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. He made it sound like it was for everyone's good." I closed my eyes, ashamed of my anger. She was as much a victim as I was. He had twisted both of us, our roles as wife and mother, into pawns in his warped obsession with legacy. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. The ticking clock on the wall sounded like a gavel. Finally, I spoke, each word deliberate. "This ends now. He may think he's clever, but the truth has a way of coming out, and I will be the one to bring it." She stared at me, wide-eyed. "What are you going to do?" I leaned back, my voice steadier than I felt. "First, I'm going to get proof. Real proof he can't talk his way around. After that..." I let the words trail, but inside, I finished the thought. "After that, I will burn down every lie he's built, brick by brick." Her tears slowed. A glimmer of relief flickered in her expression, as though sharing the truth had lifted a stone from her shoulders. I stood, placing a hand gently on hers. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I will never forgive him." On the drive home, my grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles blanched. My husband thought he had secured a legacy. What he didn't realize was that he had just declared war against the one person who knew how to dismantle him piece by piece. Me. And I would not rest until every secret he buried was dragged into the light. The house had never felt so foreign to me. The photographs on the walls, family vacations, Christmas mornings, wedding anniversaries, stared down like silent witnesses to a marriage that no longer existed. I walked from room to room that night, restless, calculating my next move. Anger had to wait. If I stormed into the living room and screamed at Mark, he would deny, twist, maybe even convince our son I had lost my mind. No, I needed proof. The next morning, I drove to a small law office on the other side of town, far enough away that no neighbor or family friend would spot me. The attorney, a woman in her 50s with kind but shrewd eyes, listened without interruption as I laid out what I had discovered. When I finished, her hands folded neatly on her desk. "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just betrayal," she said. "It's fraud. Your daughter-in-law's consent was compromised, and your son, he has a right to know who fathered his child." Her words settled heavy in the room. I nodded, throat tight. "I don't want to destroy my son, but I can't let this rot go on." "We'll start with evidence," she said. "DNA doesn't lie. Get samples, quietly. When the time comes, you'll need something undeniable." That night, I placed an order for 2 discrete test kits online. They would arrive in plain packaging. I felt almost sick hitting purchase, as if pressing the button sealed the truth into stone. Days later, the packages came. I tucked them inside a sewing box in the laundry room, an old tin where I kept needles and thimbles, a place no one but me touched. Each time I passed the box, it felt like a secret heartbeat pulsing in the dark. I planned carefully. One afternoon, when I was babysitting, I swabbed the inside of my grandson's cheek while he slept in his crib. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the cotton tip. His tiny lips smacked as he stirred, and I whispered a prayer for forgiveness. This was not against him. This was for him. Later, when Mark fell asleep in his recliner with the television droning, I hovered over him, my heart pounding so hard it seemed loud enough to wake him. With trembling hands, I swabbed the inside of his cheek. He stirred, muttered something incoherent, then sank back into his slumber. I held the swab like a weapon, sealing it quickly in the plastic vial. When I tucked the vials back into the box, my whole body sagged. It was done. The evidence was mine. Still, I couldn't stop the gnawing guilt. At dinner, I found myself staring at Mark, trying to memorize the lines of his face, wondering how much of the man I thought I loved was even real. He noticed me watching. "What's on your mind?" he asked, chewing casually. I forced a smile. "Just thinking how the baby really does have your eyes." For the briefest second, his fork stopped midair. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp, searching. Then he laughed, too loudly. "Genes play tricks sometimes." I smiled back, pretending to agree, though the words landed as confirmation. That night, I sealed the test envelopes and drove them straight to the post office. I couldn't bear having them in the house another minute. My hands trembled as I slid them through the drop slot. Once gone, they were out of my control. All I could do was wait. The waiting gnawed at me. I grew paranoid, jumping whenever the mail truck stopped, hiding the laundry box deeper in the closet in case Mark stumbled upon it. Every creak of the floorboards felt like danger. One evening, I returned home to find Mark rummaging in the laundry room. My heart slammed against my ribs. "What are you looking for?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. He straightened, holding a loose button. "My shirt lost this," he said, but his eyes flicked toward the shelf where the sewing tin had been. I smiled tightly, praying he hadn't noticed it was heavier than it used to be. When he left, I moved the box into my closet, beneath a pile of sweaters. My pulse still hadn't slowed. He was too close, too perceptive. The walls were closing in. Each night, as I lay awake, I repeated the same vow. Once the results come, he won't be able to lie anymore. Not to me, not to anyone. For now, all I could do was play the role I had perfected. Smiling wife, doting grandmother, while underneath, the evidence was already on its way to tear his perfect facade apart. The results hadn't arrived yet, but I carried the weight of them in my chest, as if the envelope were already sitting on the kitchen table. Every day stretched tight with the knowledge that truth was coming, and Mark must have sensed my distance. He watched me too closely, asked too many casual questions, lingered in rooms longer than usual, as if waiting for me to slip. By the time the weekend dinner rolled around, my nerves were frayed. We had invited our son, his wife, and the baby for a family meal. I cooked slowly, methodically, pouring every ounce of restraint into stirring sauces and setting the table, telling myself I could hold it together for one more evening. The house filled with warmth, the scent of garlic bread, the soft gurgles of my grandson, the hum of conversation. For anyone walking in, it would have looked like a scene from a family calendar. 3 generations gathered around one table, smiling under the glow of the chandelier. But beneath it all, currents of tension crackled. I noticed my daughter-in-law's unease the moment she stepped inside. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Mark hovered near her, too attentive, pulling out her chair before my son could, pouring her wine before she asked. My son, oblivious, simply beamed, bouncing the baby on his knee. We began eating, the clink of forks against plates filling the silence where laughter should have been. "So," Mark said, raising his glass, "to family legacy?" The words made my skin prickle. He had used that phrase before, but tonight it felt like a blade pressed to my throat. "To legacy," my son repeated with a grin, clinking his glass against his father's. I forced a smile, my own glass trembling. Mark went on, his voice smooth, almost theatrical. "There's nothing more important than bloodlines. It's what carries us forward, what gives us purpose." I couldn't help it. The words were poison, and I had swallowed too much already. "Sometimes bloodlines aren't what they seem," I said quietly, staring at my plate. The air shifted. My daughter-in-law froze, fork halfway to her mouth. My son frowned. "Mom?" I looked up, meeting Mark's gaze across the table. His expression was sharp, warning. For a moment, no one breathed. "Just saying," I continued with forced cheer. "Families are built on love, not just DNA. Don't you think?" My son nodded slowly, though confusion lingered in his eyes. "Of course, that's what matters." But Mark's jaw tightened. "Blood matters," he said firmly. "It always has. It always will." Silence followed, broken only by the baby's soft cooing. I reached across to stroke his tiny hand, grounding myself in the innocence that had started this storm. Dinner continued, but the air never recovered. Every laugh felt forced, every smile brittle. I could barely taste the food. My son tried to bridge the gap with stories from work, but his wife barely responded. Mark filled the silence with more talk of tradition, of carrying the line forward. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. When the plates were cleared and dessert served, I excused myself to the kitchen, needing space to breathe. I leaned against the counter, heart pounding. That toast, those words, he was practically confessing, daring me to stop him. I heard my son's voice drift in from the dining room. "Dad, why do you always make it about bloodlines? It's kind of weird." A pause, then Mark's defensive tone. "Because it matters, more than you realize." My chest tightened. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. I returned with coffee, my smile fixed, though inside rage and fear twisted together. Mark glanced at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. He knew. He knew I suspected, and I knew he was daring me to act without proof. When the evening finally ended and our son's family left, I collapsed into a chair, exhausted. Mark kissed my cheek goodnight as if nothing had happened, retreating to his office with the calm of a man who believed himself untouchable. Alone in the kitchen, I pressed my palms to the table, willing my body to stop trembling. That was when I heard the ping of my phone. A new email. The subject line froze me in place. DNA results ready for viewing. My breath caught. My hands shook as I reached for the phone, staring at the words on the screen. This was it. The truth I had been clawing toward for weeks. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. My knees buckled, and I sank back into the chair, clutching the phone to my chest. The silence of the house pressed in, thick and heavy. Upstairs, I heard the creak of floorboards, Mark moving around, the predator pacing his cage, unaware that his trap had already been sprung. The email waited like a ticking bomb in my hand, and tomorrow, I promised myself, I would detonate it. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone until my coffee went cold. The DNA report glowed on the screen, its clinical language both simple and devastating. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. There it was. No room for denial. No room for excuses. My husband was the father of my grandson. My hands shook as I set the phone down, the world tilting on its axis. For weeks, suspicion had gnawed at me. Now the suspicion had teeth. It had drawn blood. I heard the familiar shuffle of Mark's footsteps. He entered, hair still damp from his shower, buttoning his shirt like it was any other morning. He glanced at me, then at the silent phone on the table. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. I looked up at him, my chest burning. "Sit down." He hesitated. For a moment, the mask slipped. His eyes flicked to my phone, then back to me. Slowly, he pulled out a chair and sat across from me. I slid the screen toward him. "Explain this." He didn't even pick it up. He stared at it, then leaned back in his chair, a sigh escaping his lips. Not of guilt, not of shame, of annoyance. "So you know," he said. His voice was calm, almost relieved. The words ignited me. "So I know? That's all you have to say? You fathered our son's child, our grandson, and you sit there like it's nothing?" His eyes hardened. "It's not nothing. It's everything. I gave them what they couldn't have. I gave this family a future." "A future?" My voice cracked, rising. "You destroyed our son's marriage. You violated her trust. You violated me. Do you even hear yourself?" Mark leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "I saved them. Without me, there would be no baby. She would still be crying over negative tests, and he would still feel like less of a man. I fixed it." "Fixed it?" My hands slammed against the table. "You didn't fix anything. You stole. You manipulated. You played God with your own family." His jaw tightened, but his tone stayed eerily controlled. "You're overreacting. Families have always found ways to preserve bloodlines. This isn't new. It's survival." The word made bile rise in my throat. "Don't you dare dress this up as survival. This was ego, your obsession with legacy, with control. You wanted to live forever through him, through her." For the first time, anger cracked through his composure. "And what's so wrong with that? At least I had the strength to do something. You've always been content to drift, to let things happen. I built this family. I made sure it continues." Tears burned hot in my eyes. but I refused to let them fall. You didn't build anything. You tore it down. You took my marriage, my trust, my son's future, and you burned it for your pride. The kitchen door creaked. I turned. My son stood in the doorway, his face pale, his body stiff as stone. He must have come in through the back, quiet as ever, and now he had heard it all. "Dad?" His voice cracked. "Is it true?" Mark froze. For once, words failed him. "Answer me!" My son's voice thundered through the kitchen, breaking into a sob at the edges. Mark rose slowly, palms open, as though he could soothe this like a misunderstanding. "Son, listen. I did this for you. For your family. You couldn't give her what she needed, and I—" "Stop!" My son's voice shook, his hands balled into fists. "Don't you dare say this was for me. Don't you dare put this on me." His eyes brimmed with tears as he looked at me. "Mom, how long have you known?" My breath caught. The truth weighed heavy, but I couldn't lie to him now. "Not long," I whispered, "but long enough. I wanted proof before I told you." His face twisted with betrayal and grief. He turned back to his father, his voice breaking. "You were supposed to be my hero, and you're—" He choked, unable to finish. Mark reached out, but my son recoiled. The space between them felt like a canyon that could never be bridged. "This family is done," my son spat. "You're not my father anymore, and you will never be his." He pointed toward the living room, where his baby slept in a bassinet. Mark's face finally faltered, pride cracking into something desperate. "You don't mean that." But the silence that followed said otherwise. I stepped between them, my voice low but firm. "Leave, Mark, before you destroy any more of us." He looked at me, then at our son, then toward the sound of the baby's soft cry echoing from the other room. His chest heaved, but no words came. Finally, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out the door, slamming it behind him. The house shook with the impact, but inside, a deeper quake had already torn through our lives. I stood frozen, my son crumpling into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I placed my hand on his shoulder, though my own body trembled. The proof had spoken. The confrontation was done. But the wreckage, it was only just beginning. The house felt like a battlefield after the door slammed shut. My son sat slumped at the kitchen table, shoulders shaking, his face hidden in his hands. I stood beside him, the silence stretching between us like smoke after an explosion. Upstairs, the baby's faint cries carried through the floorboards. The innocence of that sound clashed against the devastation of what we had just lived through. I wanted to reach for my son, to cradle him like I did when he was a boy, scraped raw from falling off his bike. But he was a man now, broken in ways a bandage couldn't fix. My hand hovered above his back, then finally rested there, light as a feather. "Mom," he whispered, voice ragged. "How do I live with this?" My throat tightened. "One day at a time," I said softly. "We don't need to have all the answers tonight." He lifted his head, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. "He's my father. He raised me. And now he's the man who betrayed me worse than anyone else ever could. I don't even know who I am anymore." His words split me open. I wanted to rage at Mark, to curse him into dust for what he had done to our boy. Instead, I cupped my son's cheek, tears sliding down my own face. "You're still you. You're a good man, a good father. Don't let his sins redefine you." The front door opened again, footsteps quick and uncertain. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, clutching the baby against her chest. Her face was pale, lips trembling, eyes swollen from crying. She looked from me to my son, hesitation in every movement. "I heard shouting," she whispered. "Is it—" My son stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "It's true," he said, voice cracking. "Everything you told me was a lie, and the man I thought was my dad, he's—" His voice broke. "He's the father of my son." The baby whimpered, and she pressed him tighter against her chest. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want it this way. He said it would help, that it would stay a secret forever." I was terrified. My son stared at her, betrayal and pity warring on his face. "You should have told me," she sobbed. "I was scared I'd lose you." The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Then my son turned to me. "What do I do, Mom? Do I stay with her? Do I walk away? How do I raise a child knowing he's also my half-brother?" I shook my head, tears falling freely now. "There isn't an easy answer. But whatever you choose, it has to come from love, not from anger. That baby is innocent. He deserves more than the shadow your father cast on him." The baby let out a soft cry, and my son's face crumbled. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took the child into his arms. He rocked him, staring down at the little face with both wonder and sorrow. "I love him," he whispered, "no matter how he came into the world. He's still mine." Hearing that broke something loose in me. For the first time since the baptism, I felt a flicker of hope that love might still anchor us, even in this wreckage. But outside these walls, the world was already stirring. Word traveled fast in small towns, and secrets had a way of leaking through cracks. Mark's absence at work raised questions. The church whispered. By the end of the week, I received a call from a family friend who hesitated before saying, "I heard something. Is it true?" Shame burned my cheeks, though none of this was mine to carry. Gossip twisted the truth into lurid tales. Mark seducing his daughter-in-law, me covering for him, our son too weak to notice. Each rumor was a knife, but I endured them in silence. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. My heart dropped when I saw the return address. The fertility clinic. Inside was paperwork I hadn't expected. Forms showing Mark listed as acknowledged biological father for medical access. His arrogance had left a trail, even in official files. I took the documents straight to the lawyer. She pursed her lips, flipping through them carefully. "This is strong. You can build a case against both the clinic and your husband. What he did wasn't just immoral. It may be criminal." The word criminal rang in my ears. I had once built my life on this man's promises, and now the law itself was circling him. That night, I sat alone in church, staring at the stained glass where sunlight painted fractured colors across the pews. I clutched my hands together, whispering into the silence. "God, give me strength, not just to fight him, but to hold my family together through what's coming." When I rose, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. But this time, I wouldn't face it as a wife desperate to keep her marriage intact. I would face it as a mother determined to protect her son, her grandson, and herself. The fallout was ugly. It would get uglier still. But buried beneath the rubble was the steel of resolve. And Mark, my husband, my betrayer, would finally learn what it meant to underestimate me. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Light poured in through tall windows, but the stone walls carried a chill that sank into my bones. Rows of benches filled with strangers, lawyers flipping through papers, a few reporters scribbling in notepads. It was no longer just our secret. It had become a matter for the law. I sat near the front, my son beside me, his hand gripping mine tightly. His wife sat on the other side, pale but resolute, clutching a folder of documents. Between them, the baby cooed softly, oblivious to the gravity of the day. I looked at him and felt both grief and hope. He was a symbol of betrayal, yes, but he was also proof that love could survive it. Then the doors opened, and Mark walked in. He wore his best suit, the one he used to wear to charity dinners, back when I still thought we were a team. He looked older, diminished somehow, though he tried to keep his shoulders square. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. For the first time, he didn't smile. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. The lawyer I had hired presented the evidence with precision. The DNA results, the clinic documents, the testimony of my daughter-in-law. Piece by piece, she laid out the story of how my husband had manipulated the process, pressuring a young woman, violating trust, and corrupting the very foundation of our family. Mark's lawyer tried to paint it differently. He acted out of love for his family, he said smoothly. This was not exploitation, but generosity. He ensured the continuation of a family line. My stomach turned. Love? Generosity? Those words tasted like ash. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the bench as if I could keep myself from shouting. Finally, the judge called witnesses. My daughter-in-law spoke first, her voice trembling but clear. She described the pressure, the manipulation, the way Mark made it sound inevitable. She admitted her fear, her silence, her shame. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks. Then my son was called. He walked slowly to the stand, every step heavy. His voice cracked as he spoke of trust, of admiration turned to horror. I grew up believing my father was the strongest man I knew, but he was building his strength on lies. He didn't just betray me, he destroyed what a father is supposed to mean. Mark's face tightened, but he said nothing. Finally, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. My lawyer touched my arm, whispering, "You don't have to." But I did. I rose, every eye in the room on me, my hands trembling but my voice steady. For 30 years, I stood beside this man, I said, pointing toward Mark. I believed in him, trusted him, built a home with him, and in one selfish act, he burned it all. He took advantage of a vulnerable young woman. He betrayed his son. He desecrated his marriage. He shattered our family in the name of bloodline. I paused, my throat raw. But let me be clear. Family is not built on deceit. Family is built on love, trust, and truth. And today, I choose the truth. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. When I sat back down, my son squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. But I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was still here, still standing. The judge reviewed the evidence with measured words, her voice steady and final. The deception here is undeniable. While the child is innocent, the actions of the defendant are not. This court recognizes the profound violation of trust and the misconduct of the clinic involved. Legal remedies will proceed accordingly. A gavel struck. It was over, or at least this part of it was. Mark was led away, his face a mask of fury and defeat. He didn't look back at me, not once. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps he knew that even if he had, he would no longer find the woman who once stood by him. When we stepped outside into the cold air, the reporters surged forward, shouting questions. I ignored them. Instead, I bent down and lifted my grandson from his stroller. He looked at me with wide, unknowing eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. I pressed a kiss to his forehead. "You are loved," I whispered. Not because of blood, but because of choice. As we walked away from the courthouse, my son beside me, I slipped my wedding ring from my finger. It had weighed on me like an iron shackle these past months. I turned back toward the courthouse steps, placed it gently on the stone ledge, and left it there, a monument to what was lost and what I had survived. The wind caught my hair as we moved forward. Behind me, the ring glinted once in the sunlight before the shadows claimed it. Ahead of me was a road not yet clear, but mine to walk. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.